Humish and Rashi, double portion, makes it the lengthiest portion this year. It's going to be difficult to get through daily and do the best we can, as much as we can. Matot-Massei. Let's get right into it. It's actually a double portion, last portion of the book of Bamidbar, Numbers, the fourth book. Hidaber Moshe spoke al Roshei Hamatos to the heads of the tribes, Livnei Yisrael, of the children of Israel. Lamor say, this is the thing that God commanded. So Rashi, right? This is usually he's not speaking to the heads of the tribes; he's speaking to all of Israel, right? So Rashi, in other words, Rashi Mata is the heads of the tribes. Cholak Kovid Lenesim. He gave honor to the leaders of the tribes, the heads of the tribes, to teach them first. And only after Zechol B'nai Israel did he teach the rest of the children of Israel. And from where do we know She'af Shar Hadibres came that the rest of the Torah was also taught in this way? Okay, well, 1102. Here. Take this too. Okay. Okay, 1102. So how do we know that the rest of the Torah was taught this way? In other words, first to the heads of the tribes and then to the rest of Israel. Talmud Leimer, because the verse says, because we have a verse that says, and Aaron and all the princes of the assembly returned to him, and Moshe would speak to them. There's a verse in the book of Shmois of Exodus that we had much earlier. Then only afterwards he approached the rest of the Jewish people. So we see that that's the way it was described previously. There's another one of those books. I don't know where it is though. Huh? Yeah, you're okay?
She's solving online.
Yeah? Okay. Okay, good. Okay. So so we see that this is the way it was taught. So now the question that Rashi asks, why did the Torah state this over here? Right? In other words, the order, the way he taught is in the entire Torah, it's this way. He taught first the leaders and then the rest of the people. Where do we know it from? Here. But it's not just, I mean, we see it earlier in the book of Exodus also, but here, one second, but we learned it earlier. So here it's being pointed out in this particular command, as opposed to previously, I think it's just in the narrative. So why over in this command are we learning it this way? That he taught first the leaders and then the rest of the people. Lima, this teaches us that nullification of vows can be performed by an individual who's an expert. If there isn't an individual who's an expert when it comes to vows, mayfair, one can nullify his vows with three common people. Or is it possible? Or maybe we could say another way, that actually Moshe only taught this to the leaders themselves. But we see that this is not the case. right? Because it says over this is the matter. Concerning slaughtering outside of the grounds of the base of Migdash, of the Holy Temple. It also says that this is the matter. So there's a commonality between the two teachings. Malahalim, just as above regarding slaughtering outside of the temple. Nemar and it was said to Arain, or Lavan to his sons, and Israel, and it was said to all the children of Israel. Nemar, as it says there, David al Arain, speak to Arain and the sons and to his sons, and then to all of the children of Israel. So likewise, this also is never chulam. It has to be told to everybody. Okay, that might have been a little difficult to grasp. He's just proving the fact that. So he's saying like this: why is it being taught over here that the Torah was taught throughout the desert, throughout the time in the desert, right? Throughout the 40 years, not just now. It was taught first to the leaders and then to the rest of the people. Why do we learn it out over here specifically? Is to teach us an additional law that when it comes to vows, because this is what we're going to speak about here, is about vows, that to annul a vow, if you have one great scholar, that's sufficient to annul a vow. Usually you need a court to do it. If you don't have the one great scholar in vows, then you can have a court of three regular people that are not, that they're not great scholars in this, right? I mean, they have to be learned, but not, they're not as scholarly. So this is what it's teaching, because here it's speaking about each leader of a tribe. In other words, each individual. So it teaches an individual who's a great leader or a great scholar can annul vows. That's the context over here. Okay. Next Rashi in number 2. Zeh hadavar. This is the matter. Moshe nizabah b'koy Amar Hashem. Moshe prophesies, and so said Hashem. At midnight, like midnight, v'nevim nizabah b'koy Amar. And the prophets, they prophesize v'koy. Musaf aleim Moshe. Moshe was superior to them. Shenizabah b'lashon zeh hadavar. Zeh means this. What does this mean when you say this? It means this that's in front of you, right? The prophets didn't, the other prophets, as opposed to Moses, prophesied not in something that was so clear. They prophesied like this, right? Moshe, his prophecy was this. That's what he's bringing out over here. Zeh hadavar. This is the thing. This is the matter, right? In other words, implying that this that is in front of you, meaning clarity, seeing it rather than just having an image of it in a dream, for example. Davar acher, another explanation of what this word means, zeh hadavar, miyutu. This term is to exclude. In other words, when you say this, what do you mean? This and not that. That means it's excluding something. So what is it implying? What's it excluding? To tell that the sage, when he revokes a vow through wording of permitting, using the form lahatir to permit, or ba'aloshan afara, but the husband revokes a wife's vow through the wording of nullification. Wow, interesting. Like the language of the verse, im chelfo, that if the husband switched the language designated from the Torah, ein mutar be'ein mufar. The vow is neither permitted nor nullified. Okay. So Zeh hadavar is implying something positive. This, right? Meaning the manner the sage nullifies a vow, right? We're talking, this whole part is speaking, the beginning of this Torah portion is about someone who took upon themselves a vow, right? So you took upon yourself a vow, you can go to a sage or to a court of law and have it annulled because you're obliged to fulfill your vow. But let's say you're not able to for whatever reason, right? And you want to nullify the vow. So if it's the sage, so this means in the positive, he's going to say that you're permitting. He's going to use a language to revoke the vow through wording of permitting, like this thing, which is in the positive. But when a husband will revoke his wife's vow, he has to nullify it. He doesn't have, he cannot say that you are permitted. He has to negate the vow that she took. As we'll see, that's speaking about a vow that a wife took that affects her husband, right? So he has the right to nullify that. Doesn't sound very progressive, but that doesn't matter. Okay, is that clear? Okay. Now we're speaking about a person who takes a vow, right? That was the prelude to it. Ish, verse number 3. A man, ki yidor neder, when he will take a vow, la Hashem, to God, or hishava shavua, or takes an oath, lesser isar al nafshe, to prohibit something upon himself. Lo yechel devar, he should not profane his words. Everything that came out of his mouth, he's got to do. Right? Is that clear? Rashi. No. Neder, a vow. Omer, one who says, Harei alai. One who says, I take upon myself, kainam, a kainam, that I will not eat. Takes upon himself a vow that I'm not going to eat. Or that I will not do davar pleni, such a thing. Right? Yochel, one might think, I feel that even if he swears, let's say he makes an oath that I'm going to eat something not kosher. Ani love that I will say about him, everything that his mouth says he shall do. Talmud Leimer, but the verse says otherwise. Lesar Yisar, to prohibit a prohibition upon himself, that which implies lesar alamutar, to prohibit something that is permitted, not to allow yourself to do something that's not permitted. Is also not to allow yourself that which is prohibited. Right? Because the verse says that very clearly. To prohibit something that was previously permitted, but not the opposite. To permit something that is prohibited.
Rabbi, what constitutes a vow? Is it a statement?
A statement. A statement.
That a person
yeah, in the Rambam we learn all the details. Here, yeah, well, no, the verse said, everything that came out of your mouth, you got to do. So you have to verbalize it. Okay? You should not profane his words. Don't make your words profane. Okay. Verse number 4. So that's the man that does it. Now is going to speak about a child who makes a vow. Right? And this child is, well, let's see Rashi. Okay, we're going to have different levels over here of Isha Kisido Neder. And when a woman makes a vow, La Hashem, to God, V'asra Isar, and to prohibit herself on something, again, something that's permissible, right? Like, I'm not going to eat today, right? I make a vow that I'm not going to eat today. So it's binding if you make, if you're going to say that, you're going to, right? So Bebeis Avia, she is a woman in her father's home. Binureha, in her youth. What does that mean? Let's see Rashi. Number 4. Bebeis Avia on her father's home, Bereshus Avia, meaning she's under her father's authority. Bafila ina bebeisa, even if she's not in his house. How does Rashi know that? Okay. So Beis Avia doesn't mean literally in her father's house. It means under her father's authority. Why is she's under her father's authority? We're speaking about in her youth, but not a minor. And not one who's mature. Why is the verse not speaking about a minor? Because a minor can't make a vow that's binding. They're too young. You need to have intelligence for it. And a 6-year-old child is going to make a vow, it's not binding, right? Actually, even more than that. We'll see. It's not so black and white. So it's not binding. And a mature woman, you know what a mature woman is? Isn't under the authority of her father. Someone who's 12 and a half. 12 and a half, her father doesn't have authority over her. Girls, how old are you? And a half?
And a half. Oh, October, it'll be in a half. In October.
So what does it mean authority? It doesn't have authority over your vows, right? It means you're responsible for them. It means you're responsible for them, meaning you can't nullify the vow. You have to go to a sage to nullify the vow, right? That's what it means, right? In other words, at 12 and a half, you have that responsibility, right? Now, if you were, as we're going to see, okay, so Amr Abasenu. So the Ezu Katana, who is it a minor? What's a minor? Amr Abasenu, so our sages say, a girl who's 11 and a day old. Nidareha nivdokim. Her vows are examined. What does that mean? Im yada, if she realizes l'shemi nidra, that whose sake she is vowing, or l'shemi hekdisha, and for whose sake she's consecrating, right? Consecrating meaning, let's say she had money and she says, "I'm consecrating this to the holy temple," right? I'm giving this to the holy temple. So does she understand what that means? She said something, but does she understand what that means if she's 11 and a day old, right? That is called a minor. Then if she understands, then her vow is binding. And a girl is 12 years and 1 day, and you don't need to examine. So what are we speaking about here when we speak about in her youth, from 11 and a day old till 12? We got to check to see if she understands what she did. Under that, she's a minor. The vow is in binding. Under that, the vow is in binding. 11, it's binding if she understood the ramifications of it, what she was doing. From 12, you don't have to check. She's already considered mature enough to understand, but the father can annul it. From 12 and a half on, he can't annul it. Got it?
Yeah.
Girls?
Without going to the sage.
Right. Exactly. Without going to the sage. That's the point. Also, from 12 to 12 and a half, the father has that right. From 12 and a half on, he doesn't have that right anymore, and only a sage or a court of law could annul the vow, right? Otherwise, of course, you got to fulfill the vow. I mean, you don't have to annul the vow; you could be fulfilled, right? Okay, Vishama Aviha, verse number 5. Her father heard, es nidra, her vow, the Sarah, and the prohibition, asher asr al nafsha, that she imposed upon herself. The hechrisha, and he was quiet about it, Aviha, her father, right? In other words, he didn't protest. Then all of the vows are binding. Kamu means it's binding. And all of the prohibitions that she took upon herself, yakum, are binding. But if, on the other hand, her father means hinders, I saw her, on the day that he heard all of her vows, and all the prohibitions that she took upon herself, lo yakum, they will not be binding, her vows, her prohibitions. Hashem will be forgiving to her. Because her father hindered her, meaning he annulled her vows. Got it? Let's see Rashi now. What is some exactingness over here? If her father prohibit here he translates hinders, it could be restrained her meaning from her vows. Imana Isa, if he held her back, I mean another from the vow, kaloimer, that's to say, sheheferla, he nullified the vow that she made. Vahano zu, this instance of the word the Haini is removing, withholding. Mahi, I don't know what it is. The meaning is not obvious. When it says im bayoim shamaya isha, that if on the day their husband's hearing yania isa, he's bringing later on. This is speaking about a father with a daughter, not speaking about a husband and a wife. He shall restrain her, hefer and nullify. The Aimer, you would say, Hana zu hafara, the Hana is the nullification. Pshuta, the simple meaning, lo shemeniya basara, means an expression of withholding and removal. Chen lama ninin, we see similar, this idea that means to remove. Chen Hashem reishi yani reishi. Chen yedaitus nuasi. Okay. He's just showing different instances that it means to withhold, to restrain, to hold back. Right? This word. What does it mean that God will forgive her? What's he forgiving her for? What is the verse speaking about? What does she need to be forgiven? She took a vow when the father annulled it. Okay. So Rashi explains, it's speaking about a woman who took a vow of a Nazarite. Shama Baila. Whoa. What the heck? And now it's speaking about a woman, a wife actually, took a vow to be a Nazarite, which means not to drink wine, not to become impurified, extra, holiness upon herself. The Shama Baila, and her husband heard, they nullified her vow. But she was not aware that her husband revoked the vow. Nidra. And she violated the vow. The Shesa Yain, and she drank wine. Or she became impure by coming in contact with the corpse. This person needs forgiveness. This woman needs forgiveness. Because she didn't know it was nullified, the vow, by her husband, right? And so in her mind, she transgressed. Even though it's nullified, and for those vows have been nullified, one needs forgiveness. All the more so, are those that are not nullified that you need forgiveness. So what I don't get over here, how does Rashi get this in speaking about a married woman? when the verse is speaking about a girl who her father is got jurisdiction over her still. I don't know. I'm not certain. Okay.
Seems like it's still the daughter.
Yeah, but we didn't. Now we're going to speak about a married woman in this next verse. But in the previous verse, we were speaking about a daughter in her father's jurisdiction, right? Authority. Huh? Why couldn't this be the daughter that took upon herself to be a Nazarite and the father nullified the vow? She wasn't aware of it. Why do we have to say that it's a married woman? Uh, okay, I'm just surprised that there's no mention of this here in the commentaries.
Well, the husband does have a certain authority.
Yeah, but the verse is speaking about a father and a daughter. It's not speaking about a husband. So where's Rashi bring that in? The next verse is speaking about a husband and a wife, right? So it's true what you're saying, but it's not in the verse that we're talking about. Okay, we need greater understanding. Not only that, the verse says, "Ki heini avia," he said her father restrained her. Right? Okay. Next verse, 7. Bim hayatiya leish, and if it will become, if she becomes to a man, meaning she's betrothed to a man, right? When they're all now on, she's got vows upon her. Or from the lips that she imposed upon herself. She uttered with her lips and imposed upon herself, right? And now she's betrothed. Rashi in 7, if she would be married, meaning that she will be unto a man. That's what it literally means, right? Zu arusa, it's speaking about someone who is an arusa or reina nesuya, or maybe it's someone who's nesuya. What's back in the day? Today, there's two parts to marriage. There's betrothal, and then there's chuppah. Betrothal is you give a ring, and then you go back home. Each goes back to their home and prepare for the next 6 months to a year for the wedding. That was the way it was done many centuries ago. Now we do it both together, the ring under the chuppah, and then we read the marriage contract, the ksuba, to separate between the two, and then you have the 7 blessings under the chuppah. So you have the two that come together, right? But that's the way we do it today. The way it was done back in the day is betrothal first. So this verse is speaking about betrothal. How do we know? Maybe it's speaking about from when living together, because betrothal you don't live together, you're just bound to each other. When it says im beis isha nidara, that if she vowed in her husband's house, which will be later in verse number 11, right? Im beis isha nidara, that she's vowed in her husband's house. That's speaking about that she was then married, living together, right? Well, so therefore our verse over here is speaking about that they're only engaged or betrothed. This verse comes to make a distinction between the two. In other words, fully married and just engaged. That her father and husband nullify their vows jointly. Hey, so we're talking about here someone who's living in her father's home. She is engaged, right? It's more than what we call engagement here today, because if she would have relations, she's considered like a married woman, even though they're not living together. They're preparing for the marriage, they're not living together, but they're two halves of one soul. So, but she's living in her father's home, which means she's got two authorities over her: father and the husband who's engaged, right? And therefore, both need to nullify. If one nullifies without the other, it's not a nullification. They both need to nullify. Let's see Rashi. Shavio Baila, that her father and her husband jointly have to nullify her vows. If the father nullified her vow, but the husband did not nullify the vows, or the opposite. If the husband nullified the vows, but the father didn't nullify the vows, this is not called nullification of vows. We don't need to say, it goes without saying, if the vow is not nullified, if one of them upholds them verbally, even if the others nullify it. So what are we saying over here? Both have to nullify, right? Because she is living at home, but she is engaged. But who are we talking about? Yeah, but only till 12 and a half. Because at 12 and a half, she's anyways on her own. Remember, even her father's home, except to the husband. So we'll see. Okay. And the vows are upon her. Second Rashi in 7. She took vows in her father's house under her father's authority. Her father didn't hear them. And they were not nullified, were not upheld. What does it mean that the vows are upon her? Right. Because what we're going to learn, someone can take a vow and the father or the husband doesn't know about it, right? So they're upon her. It's only when he becomes aware of it, that's when he has the opportunity to nullify it, right? Otherwise, he wouldn't have the opportunity. He's not aware of it.
If he hears about it the next day or 2-3 days after.
So we're going to learn that. We're going to see that when he hears it, he has that day to nullify it, right? Otherwise, it will become something that needs to be fulfilled, or go to a sage or to a court of law if you want to have it annulled, right? If that's you're looking to know. The point over here is that there is an authority over her. Okay. So she took the vow in her father's house under his authority, and he didn't hear it. Right? Now, verse number 8 is going to continue this thought. Vishama Isha, and her husband or fiance heard B'yam Shamoya in the day that he hears. What do you mean the days that he hears? In other words, and the day that he hears, and he was quiet about it, silent about it, then her vows become binding. And the prohibitions that she took upon herself, upon herself, Yakumu, will be binding. Rashi, Shemaya Isha, her fiance heard, or her husband heard. Harei lecha she'im kayim abal, shu kayim. So from here we understand that if the husband or the fiance upheld the vow, it's valid.
Silence is approving.
Yeah, exactly. Because she did something. You have to do something to counteract it. You can't just be silent about it, right? Number 9, and if on the day that the husband will hear, Yani Oisa, he will prevent it. Behavior is nidra, and he will nullify her vow, Ashera aleha, that's upon her, the Eis Miftav Sifasah, and that which she expressed, uttered with her lips, Asher Asher Nafsha, that she prohibited upon herself. Hashem Yitzchak Hashem will forgive her. We gotta have the forgiveness over here. Let's see number 9. She shall nullify her vow. Yochel, one might think that on this verse of that if the husband of this newlywed, you can nullify the vow. Second, the husband of the in this engagement, that he can nullify the vow of his wife, even if the father did not nullify it. The verse says, and the youth in her youth in her father's house, which implies all that is in her youth until 12 and a half. She's under the authority of her father. Because our verse over here is just speaking about him nullifying, right? But remember it's not speaking about the father, yet she's in Second, make sure I got this 100%. Okay. Yeah, based on this verse, so I would think that it's only the husband that can annul, but we're going to see later on in verse 17 that no, she's in her father's authority because she's in her father's home. Remember, because she's only engaged here, she's not married. She's married, they're living together. Engagement means they're not living together. Okay. Number 10. Beneder Almana, and the vow of a widow, a grusha or a divorcee, Kol asher asher al nafsha yakum aleha. Anything that she prohibited upon herself is binding upon her. Rashi, Kol asher asher al nafsha yakum aleha. So any prohibition is binding upon her. If you say of, you might think, well, let's say she got got divorced or husband passed away. She's not 12 and a half yet. Let's say, right? She's not 12 and a half. So then whose authority is she under? You think she's under her father's authority, right? Because she's not 12 and a half yet. No, that's what this verse is coming to say. Right? So she's not under the authority of the father or of the husband. Right? This is verse is speaking about someone who became married, though, meaning they live together. But a widow from betrothal, and the husband passed away, and his regular the authority to nullify. This is really Rishon. So it's now taken away from the husband and it's given back to the father, right? If they were only engaged. Got it? Yeah, just to give you an appreciation, back in the day, people were like, they were very to support a family was a very difficult thing. So you marry off just to take sure your kids are being supported. Make sure that they're supported. The first thing, we live in a day today that support, financial support, material, physical support is not as needed as it was 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And back in the day, emotional support was a very, very insignificant part of marriage because people just had to struggle to make bread. Today, bread is available. No one's working to make bread. You had to make your bread. Otherwise, you didn't have bread. You had to make anything and everything. Everything was hard, hard, harsh work, right? So just survival, right? And forget about pogroms and inquisitions and all that stuff. Just normal, regular day-to-day living was a huge struggle for survival. So if you didn't have money and you were struggling and you could marry off your daughter to be financially secure, right? So you marry off in order to have that security. So Torah allows it at a young age as a result, right? Don't marry off your girls at 12 and a half.
Not a chance.
But what's interesting over here is how, in a way, it's very progressive over here that at 12 and a half, a father can't nullify the vow. He doesn't have the authority. Okay, in any case, over here, the authority is given back to the father. Why? Because she was only engaged. If she was actually married, marriage means that the father never has authority after that, even if she's underage. Okay. Number 11. Im base. Oh boy. Okay. Im base isha base isha. And if um in the house of her husband, isha is husband, nadra she took, right? Now they're married in the house, right? What does it mean in the house? Means not betrothal. They're living together, right? After chuppah. Nadr, she took a vow, or also Yisar al Nafsha, Bishavua, with an oath. So Rashi, in Isha Nadra, Nesiya Kosim Medaber, speaking about they're fully married. The Shama Isha and her husband heard. The Hechrisha, and he was quiet about it, silent. And it didn't prevent. Oh, he saw her. Therefore, they're binding all of her vows. And all of the prohibitions that she took upon herself are binding. But if, however, the husband will annul the vow, but Yom Shemoy, on the day that he heard, all that she uttered from her lips, for her vows, to prohibit upon herself, and they will not be binding. He nullified them, and Hashem will forgive her. Again, will forgive her for what? That if she didn't know that they were annulled and she went against it, right? But they were annulled, right? She still needs to be forgiven. Okay. 14. Okay. So now what does it mean? When can a husband annul his wife's vows? So this is what this verse is coming to tell us. Either upheld or annulled the vow is in a binding oath of self-affliction. Rashi in number 14. Call it Esau, a vow or an oath of prohibition. Since the verse says Habal Mefer that the husband can nullify. Yochel, I might think on the Doran B'Mishma. That all vows he can nullify any vow that she takes. The verse now comes to say the opposite. No, it gives it now a boundary. That cause personal affliction to him. You can only nullify those things that are a personal affliction to him. And they're explained in the Tractate of Nedarim. In others, she says, I'm not going out with my husband. He can nullify that because that's an affliction to him, right? If it's something that affects him, then if it's something that only affects her, then he has no right over it. Then 15. If he was quiet to his wife, Isha, no, her husband, from day to day, then it will be fulfilled. It will be binding all of her vows, and all of the prohibitions that she took upon herself will be binding. Because he was silent, but in the day that he heard. What does it mean from day to day? From day, right? Number 14, or sorry, 15, rather. Yoim el yoim, shall I say, you shouldn't say meis that a husband can nullify a vow from in a 24-hour period. Look, remember that's what's yoim el yoim, from day to day. This is to teach you only until it becomes dark that day. In other words, if you heard now about the vow, he can nullify until it comes dark tonight. If he only heard it an hour before dark, he only has till then. Okay. But if he announces them after he heard, he will bear her iniquity. 16 in Rashi. After you heard, after you heard Bikiyam, and he upheld it. Boy, I want the vow. Chazar then he went back on it. They for law and he annulled it. Even on that day. Right? In other words, once he's okay with it, that he is upholding it, he can't go back on it and now want to nullify the vow. And also, if he does that, he bears her iniquity. He enters in her stead. We come from here, we learn, someone who causes an obstacle to his friend, causes him to sin. He enters in his stead for all the punishments that are decreed from the heavenly court. There isn't a punishment here in a human court, but in a heavenly court. Last verse in this part, even though we have more to learn, but we don't have the time to do it because we're going to go to Tanya now. These are the statutory laws that God commanded Moshe, between a man and his wife, between a father and a daughter, while she is in her father's house. That's where we learned that you need both of them to annul. Like, why is it saying in her father's house here? We knew that already earlier, meaning because it speaks about husband and wife, daughter and father. So it's speaking about when they are married. So he still has jurisdiction as when in the father's house because